It is our great pleasure to announce today's interview with Andy Kaufman, an award-winning project manager, leadership keynote speaker, and a member of the Project Management Institute. In the past 20 years, Andy has helped individuals and organizations lead projects, manage resources, and gain both theoretical and practical skills which are essentials to delivering successful projects. In addition to being a certified trainer, he is a certified project management professional, author of several books, and host of the People and Project podcast. Andy serves as a president of the Institute for Leadership, Excellence and Development, where they assist the improvement of project management processes and leadership skills of employees at organizations such as the United Nations, Northern Trust, McDonald's, University of Pennsylvania, and many others across dozens of industries. Today, we will explore the world of project management by talking directly to Andy about his experience, practice, and advice. Andy, thank you for accepting our invitation. We are honored to have you as a guest and share your knowledge with our readers and listeners.
Juliana, you need to know this is an honor for me. I'm a big fan of the work that you do. You add a lot of value to the community, so thank you.
Andy, you are well known in the project management world as an expert in optimizing development processes, training labor resources, and effectively delivering projects. Looking back to the very beginning, you started your career as a programmer analyst. Can you tell us more about your background in business data processing and the moment you decided to focus your attention on project management?
Yeah. Early, like in high school, I knew I wanted to get into software development, and it was definitely kind of an emerging area. And so my first jobs were doing software development. And within software, we treated things like projects. At the time, we didn't necessarily call people project managers, but we tended to think of our work as projects. We used that terminology, just like within construction that was used. But there were a lot of other areas that were not necessarily thinking of things in terms of projects. So I grew up in my career thinking of that. I went from a software developer to being promoted into management for all the wrong reasons. Have you ever seen that before, where someone's reasonably good at this and then they get promoted as a manager of that? And so that was my experience. And I made all kinds of mistakes, but after a while learned how to lead a team and was promoted into from a manager to a director and to eventually a vice president. And during that time, project management became a little bit more formalized, as some would argue whether it's a profession or not, but regardless, it got organized, more formalized. And what I found was it really resonated with me of having a more organized approach to how we deliver. So instead of, if dependent on who's running the project, that's how we do things, having more of a common way of doing things across the teams that I manage. And so I have yet to meet someone who said at the age of 8, they said, "Mommy, someday I want to be a project manager." People don't generally say that sort of thing, but they end up almost like accidentally becoming a project manager, or they grow into it because they want to make a difference. And that was really my path into it as well, Juliana.
Taking into consideration that you have more than 30 years of professional experience working on diverse projects, can you tell us more about the challenges that you have faced along the way?
Yeah, each project always has its own challenges, which honestly is why I think it's great to be a project manager. I think it's great to be in this career because our jobs are typically not the same each day, right? Or each project. There's always that variability. And so over the course of time, I started in technology projects, but about 19 years ago is when I started my company doing what I'm doing now. And most of our projects aren't tech projects. We do all kinds of, learning and development sort of projects, or developing new curriculums for universities and things like that. But over the years of doing it, I have to tell you, the biggest challenges are rarely the technology. It's almost always, and I know this is a theme through your other PM tips as well, people that I greatly admire that you've had as part of your PM Tips show. It's the people, right? It's almost always the people related things that are the most challenging. And that could be, I can think of past bosses that were difficult bosses, or challenging clients, or really difficult, team member sort of situations, which once again is not necessarily make the job fun, but I think being a project manager is extra special because we get to deal with all those different aspects. It's not just the technology, it is with the people side. And so it's something that we never really perfect. So we never really arrive. It's something that we can keep trying to get better at. And so even though it is challenging, I think that just adds a lot of, really makes it a special sort of career path because of that.
From adjunct professor at the Loyola University of Chicago to hosting a podcast and being head of the Institute for Leadership Excellence and Development, there is no doubt that you have many responsibilities. How do you manage to stay organized and on track of your day-to-day professional activities? What does a typical day in the life of Andy Kaufman looks like?
Yeah, I would guess it's the same as you, Juliana, that it really depends on the week, right? It depends on what's going on. But a typical day, I am teaching some sort of class, whether it's a 1-hour keynote at a conference, or whether it is some sort of all-day workshop, or a webinar. We've been doing virtual teaching for about a decade now, but increasingly with the coronavirus, almost everything has been virtual for recent months. But most days I'm speaking somewhere. And on the days that I'm not, I'm often either prepping for a podcast, or interviewing someone for the podcast, or working on the production of the podcast. It's depends on the week, but that could be about a quarter of my week hours wise. And then when I'm teaching my MBA classes at Loyola University's business school, that will take up a good amount of time each week as well. So some lessons regarding this is, left to my own devices, I would work 60, 70, 80 hours a week because I love what I do, right? And I think you have some of this too, Julianne, don't you? Like you seem to really enjoy what you do, right?
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. And so it's not a chore. It's one of those things that we truly enjoy doing. But two things come to mind from past podcast guests. One was James Clear, who wrote a fabulous book called Atomic Habits. Like, I would say it's required reading for anybody in our profession. And another one was Eric Barker, who wrote a book called Barking Up the Wrong Tree, which is a playoff of his last name. It's kind of a funny name. But something that James Clear talks about is it's a book about habits. And it really is about the importance of habits. And so much of our life is kind of like on autopilot. Like, it depends on the research you look at, but often 40 to 45% of our day is on autopilot. And so it's not just the choices we make that make a difference. They do, but it's often the habits that we create that have this compounding effect over time. And so I find that I have to really work on developing healthy habits. Otherwise, I will just not stop working. And so for example, habits of, I track my time. So I use it's a website, but it's also an app called Toggl, Toggl. And it gives me visibility into my time. We often don't have visibility into our time. And so by making work more visible, I can look at it and say, like, for example, last week, I worked a little over 60 hours. And I can look, of those 60 hours, where did I spend my time? And so one of the things that I keep an eye on is, how much time do I spend on the podcast? And I have a team that helps me with the podcast. And so if I'm spending too much time there, it means I'm probably doing too much. I need to lean on my team more. So providing visibility, or we might say transparency, into my time. So I post my Toggl report to my team on our Slack channel every week. And so I know not only how I allocate my time, but I want my team to see how I allocate my time as well. And so knowing that other people will see it as well helps me be a little bit more responsible. And the thing from Eric Barker's book that I have found was really, really helpful. Eric's Barking Up the Wrong Tree, the subtitle was something like, Why Everything You Know About Success is Mostly Wrong. And so he has a lot of really clever insights in the book. But probably one of the most helpful to me is this line that he says, Juliana, and I think it's important for both you and I and for everyone who visits PM Tips, and that is, the world will not draw a line. Okay? So he's like, the world will not draw a line. If you choose to give your company an extra 5 hours, do you think your company will take it? So what do you think, Juliana? If you offer to work 5 more hours this week, do you think your company will take it?
I think they will, yes.
Absolutely. And if there's some sort of organization you volunteer at, if you want to offer them more time, will they take it? Absolutely. So his point is, the world will not draw a line. You have to draw a line. And I find when it comes to managing our time, if we don't take responsibility for it, other people are glad to do it for us. So the thing that I find that I have to do is just say, where do I draw the line? And it can depend on what the situation is. If I'm working on something and maybe depending on the deadlines, I'll work more hours or less hours, but the world will not draw a line. And the culture in Northern Macedonia and the culture in the US and the culture in South Korea and the culture in Italy, right? Each kind of culture is different of how we look at work and what is acceptable or not. But whatever culture we are in, it's ultimately our responsibility. Where do we draw that line? And I've had to learn how to do that.
Andy, even though they are similar, the several roles which you occupy certainly would leave our listeners curious to know in which position you feel most comfortable. Being a teacher, delivering keynotes and workshops, writing books, hosting podcasts, or managing the business and technical development of an organization?
That's actually a really insightful question, because everyone wears many hats, right? And like I wear the husband hat, I wear the father hat, and I wear a business owner hat and a keynote speaker and a workshop leader and a podcast host, and many, many, many hats. And so as I grew in my career from software developer to manager to director to vice president, I got to the point, Juliana, where I was looking at, am I spending my time doing what I do best? And I think that's an important question that we often don't ask. I think we often are like, well, I guess I just have to do this job because that's my only opportunity right now. I run into a lot of people. I've had over 250 executive coaching clients. There are a lot of people who are living other people's lives, if you know what I mean. They're trying to make mommy and daddy happy because mommy and daddy said be an engineer, or be a doctor, or, well, my boss gave me this opportunity, I guess I'll say yes. And they're living someone else's life. So I got to the point of trying to figure out, well, what am I best at? And so I've had the opportunity in the podcast to interview Marcus Buckingham, the father of the strengths movement. And a big part of the strengths movement is when we are operating within our strengths, we are so much more effective. And so I have found, when I was going through that evaluation of, do I leave the corporate world and start something on my own, which can be a scary thing. Like, I'm not a big risk taker by nature, but I got to the point of, you know what? I don't really like being a vice president of a corporate in the corporate world. I feel like I was just dealing with politics and budgets and furthest away from what I really love. And so, to the point of your question, what do I really love? Like, I love developing people. And so if you look at some of the major, roles that you pointed out. So when I'm teaching 2 MBA programs, what am I doing? I'm teaching, I'm developing people who are motivated to try to help their career. When I'm doing the podcast, it's really usually most episodes are not me in a teaching role. It's more of a facilitation, trying to draw, just like you're doing right now, trying to draw, insights from the guests and make that available. But it really is a teaching sort of thing. It is how can we help, maximize the learning whether I'm doing a keynote or a workshop or coaching. The common theme across all of it is, at the core, I'm a learner. And I think you've got that in you too, Juliana. And so when you're a learner, you just you're reading this book and you're just like, I can't put this book down. Look at what I mean, that's such a good idea. It's like, I don't know if I like that idea, but we're taking it in. And one of the best ways to learn, and this is proven research, is to teach. And so as we learn and as we teach, we continue to learn. And the common theme across everything I do, which makes all of it in some ways, to ask me which is my favorite is like asking which of my 5 kids is my favorite kid. I mean, I love them all, but what I really love doing is maximizing people's potential. If they want to grow in an area, how can I help them grow? And so the podcast is about that. The teaching in the business school is, the workshops, everything is about how can we help people grow. And so when I learn something, I want to immediately teach it as much as possible. So even though I've been teaching an MBA class for many years, each quarter is different because of new stuff that's been learned. And it's like, how can I pass that on to people? So it really is about how can we maximize the potential of people, and each of my roles really get to do that.
Andy, you have been in an executive position in several organizations. Hence, you have managed businesses and technical development, provided executive leadership to systems departments, and developed strategies that sustainably increase productivity. During the course of these years, which project would you say was the most challenging one and affected your professional life the most?
Yeah, it's interesting. As a guy, I can't say this definitively, but I hear people say that that it's easy to forget the pain of childbirth the further away you are from it. And so I've probably forgotten much of the pain of some of the projects, but I like to think of a lot of the challenges are the things that help build resilience, and those challenges kind of build our ability to take other ones on. So I'm sure there are far more projects that I could talk about than I remember. But one interesting part of your question is, which one impacted my career the most? And I think that's a really insightful question, Juliana, because I worked for the company AC Nielsen for some years. We worked with data and reporting, and we had one particular project that was entitled the Nielsen Report Writer. And people typically contract with Nielsen because they have products that are sold through grocery stores or other retail chains, and they want to understand how are we doing with market share? What if we would change our pricing this way? So a lot of trying to understand data in order to inform decision making. So the Nielsen Report Writer project was influential in my career for one primary reason. First of all, it was a good challenge. We were using new technology. There's some new technology from Microsoft in particular at the time we were using, and a rather disruptive sort of project for us as an organization, and during the project, things went really well with the project. And at one point, Microsoft said, would you come and speak at our Tech Ed conference and just give like a 5-minute overview of your project? And so, strategically from their standpoint, they could tell their audiences about how wonderful their technology is. But if they could get a customer to come and say, whoa, Microsoft's great, that's kind of what they were trying to get us to do. And here's the interesting thing is, at that time, if I was to stand in front of a group of 10 people, Juliana, and have to give a presentation, I would be really nervous if there's only 10 people. This was, according to them, going to be an audience of 7,500 people. And so for some unbelievable reason, I said yes. And after I said yes, sometimes the words come off your lips and all of a sudden you're like, oh, why did I say that? And it was probably the scariest week of my life preparing for it. And thankfully there was a podium in front of me that I could hang on to for like dear life, like a sailor holding on while the storm was going on. It was a really scary experience for me, but it went okay. I mean, it went so okay that they said, would you do that again at there's another technology conference, only do it for an hour. And I'm like, okay. And that led to another thing, and I started speaking at conferences maybe only once or twice a year. And it was not about that project even anymore, but conferences are always looking for practitioners to come and speak. Well, after a while I ran into somebody that they asked me, they go, do you speak for a living? And I'm like, you can speak for a living? Like, how does that work? Like, I didn't even know that was a career, and I started spending time with people who did it for a living and trying to understand the business model. And I got to a point, Juliana, where it was this really important point of, do I pursue this as a dream, or do I just take the safe route? And the safe route would have just been stay with my current job, even though I didn't necessarily like it that much. It had plenty of pay. It covered more than our needs financially. I could just stay there, maybe earn a retirement, or something like that. Or do I take the step? And I just got to the point where I didn't want to, if I got to live to be 70 someday, I didn't want to wish I would have. I wanted to try it. And so that project had its fun and interesting challenges, but I think a lesson we can abstract from it, Juliana, is sometimes our most difficult projects, at least at the time that was really difficult, leads to other opportunities. And this led to an opportunity. And I think project managers find this out, like others do as well, that if we say yes, even when it's a challenge, it often leads to more and interesting opportunities. And that's true for me. So the project itself was just the catalyst to now I'm 19 years later doing what I absolutely love. And it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for that project. Isn't that interesting how that works?
Yeah, it's really inspiring to hear this story. Taking into consideration that the world we live in is constantly changing due to emerging technologies, how can project managers successfully face new challenges and effectively manage projects?
Every once in a while, I'll hear somebody say, yeah, I've got 20 years of experience, but the more I speak with them, what becomes apparent is that they have 1 year repeated 20 times. If you know what I mean? Like they're really living off of things that they learned many years ago. Now, of course, we're doing that, but I think that probably the primary thing that we need to be focusing on as project managers is how do we develop a habit of learning? Like, how do we force ourselves to not just live off of what we learned a long time ago? So this because you're interviewing so often. Every time you have an interview, you learn something, right? Even if it's just repeating something you knew before, right? Have you found that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, me too. And so I find that for me, the podcast is a forcing function for learning. And so it requires me to keep doing that. And I think for some certifications, for example, there's the continuing education credit. So you have to get if somebody's a project management professional, a PMP, they have to get PDUs. And so that tries to be a forcing function to keep us learning. But don't do it just for the PDUs, right? Don't do it just to go through the motions. I think the thing to keep us relevant is we have to, at our core, want to be a learner. So I interviewed, her name is Whitney Johnson. This is a couple of years ago. She wrote a book called Build an A-Team, and she shows it as an S-curve. And if you can think of it as an S-curve, that down at the bottom is when you're new at something. It's uncomfortable because you have to learn a lot. It's not very comfortable. You're most motivated on the upswing, and then at the top is when you feel like you're kind of like, I'm confident and competent.
Like
And
that.
one of the points that she makes is don't spend too much time at the top of the S curve. Because if you spend too much time, in fact, Juliana, why do you think it might not be good to spend too much time at the top of the S curve? Any thoughts?
Well, you never learn anything else. You will never be able to face new challenges.
Right. Yeah. You get complacent. You you don't get stretched. And one of the things that she talks about is you can get automated out of a job, right? Because
Yeah,
yeah,
good point. Yeah.
yeah, or someone younger and gets paid less knocks us off too, right? And so her point is she says it in the book, like you need to jump to another S curve, which does not necessarily mean leave your company. It might mean take on bigger projects, maybe become a program manager, look for other opportunities, maybe go and teach, maybe on the side go speak at a PMI chapter or something to keep stretching us. And there's a quote by Eric Hoffer that I probably won't get it word for word correctly. And I've actually seen a couple of variations of it, so I'm not even sure which exactly is the correct one from Hoffer, but it goes something like this. It's the learners who inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped for a world that no longer exists. I love that quote because top of the S curve, what happens? You're beautifully equipped for a world that no longer exists. Given enough time, things are different. So I can't tell you how often, although less, but I run into people who go, yeah, Agile, that's just for the cool kids, or Agile, it's just for software, or whatever it is. It's just easy to write off and say, I don't need to go and learn that stuff. And I'm not saying you even have to love Agile or disciplined Agile or Project Management Institute or whatever. You don't have to love any of this stuff, but there's this, what am I doing to get exposed to these ideas? Which is one of the reasons why it's good to follow PM Tips, because you're exposing people to all these ideas. And it is the learners who inherit the earth. And when we are in so much disruption, not just because of global pandemics and protests and things of the current day, but there will always be disruption. And we have to keep finding ways, some forcing function to keep us learning and curious. And even one guest told me this, he goes, keep a stance of uncertainty. And that's his way of saying, just keep this stance of, I don't know it all. And there's subtlety and nuance to what I've maybe believed for a long time, and be open to changing minds and opinions. And so it is I think the healthiest way to live. And it's certainly good from a career perspective, but it is force yourself to stay curious and to be a learner and not to get complacent at the top of the S curve. I think that's the key for us leading projects.
Andy, you already scratched the surface about the coronavirus pandemic, and since we are talking about challenges, 2020 is definitely a challenging period. What do you think the coronavirus pandemic will teach us about project management?
Yeah, it's interesting because it is a year we will never forget, right? I mean, it is a challenging year, but 2 years from now, it'll be something different. And it may not be a virus, but it could be, it could be all kinds of things. And so I think one of the really positive benefits from the coronavirus thing is this idea of, is it possible in a role to still be productive and yet work from home? How can we as a team still be productive? And I know there are many industries where that's not even an option. And there are some parts of the world where reliable bandwidth and power, still is not an option. So I realize that I'm saying this from a very privileged point of view, that I work in an industry, in a situation that allows me to be able to do this. But I'm telling you, this opens up lots of opportunities, because let's say that there is great talent in Northern Macedonia, or let's take your case, great talent let's say someone is in Norway and they don't want to move to your office in Sweden and they don't want to move to Northern Macedonia, but they still want to be part of your organization. The infrastructure and some of the habits and policies necessary, it's been accelerated during this whole time of, hey, we can do this. The collaborative tools are better now than ever. And so it will open up ability for us to tap into talent regardless of where it is, I think even more so. And so I think that's a very positive effect of this. And I think it's kind of given us a wake-up call of, man, things were going pretty good, and then this happened. My job isn't maybe as secure as I thought, or my industry maybe is not as stable as I thought. We need wake-up calls. They're not fun, but we need something to kind of like jiggle our attention. And I think the global lockdowns has helped in that regard. So I think the good project management has always been agile in the sense of we need to respond to change as it happens. And this has certainly forced some of us to say, yeah, we can have roadmaps and strategic plans, but we also need to be able to pivot and adjust. And I think project management is well suited to help organizations during that. So I'm very optimistic. I've got a really good friend. He ran a very high leadership position in a pharma company for many years. He got called in by the coronavirus task force at the U.S. and he's very plugged in with what's going on, and he's very optimistic about how things are going to turn out of this. And I don't mean to minimize any of the pain that has happened, because there's been a lot of pain. There's been a lot of death and loss and things like that. But he's like, we've learned a lot. And one of the lessons is global lockdown was a really bad idea and not necessary. It's protect the most vulnerable, but we now have data to support that, and of how, if there's a resurgence or the next time something like this happens. And so I don't know, it's a time of great learning, but if project managers know anything, there will be change. It's not a matter of if there will be change, it's only a matter of when. And so we know that we have to find ways to adjust but keep moving forward, and we've had to learn that. Everyone's had to learn that.
Andy, let's focus our attention on your keynotes and workshop programs organized by the Institute for Leadership, Excellence and Development. What is the main object of these programs? What does a typical workshop look like? And what can the participants expect from such an event?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. Almost always the kind of like the presenting issue that someone comes to me with is, we have a team of people or a department or within our company, we're being asked to deliver things, but we're having trouble delivering. So, can you help us learn how to deliver more effectively? Or we have some promising leaders, but we want to prepare them to take on more leadership, capability and responsibilities. And so almost always the presenting issue has something to do with leading and delivering. So our keynotes and workshops are under that umbrella of leadership or project management. And I mean, those are pretty big categories. So underneath leadership, it could be anything from dealing with conflict or decision-making or managing time and, coaching. And I mean, there's lots of influence is a big part. So increasingly, we're being asked to give keynotes and workshops on influencing skills, like how do I influence a boss or client? Because a lot of times project managers don't have authority. We can't just go kick somebody's butt to get it done. We have to find a way to influence and nudge and try to help them do things. So that's would be under kind of the leadership side. And the project management side, our workshops and keynotes are very rarely just purely technical project management, because the most difficult part of project management is rarely learning the technical aspects of project management. They're important, but almost always it's the people and the leadership and the knowledge of the industry and business. So almost always we're in-house at a company, or partnering with universities and colleges for open enrollment. When I do work with the United Nations, we'll typically have 3 or more continents in the sessions at the same time. I mean, we'll have people from all over the world. And so it could be as large as an organization like the United Nations or the World Health Organization or the International Criminal Court that we work with, or it could be small startups. And so it can vary widely. But our typical workshops and keynotes are heavy on practical and highly interactive. And so even the web sessions we do, the webinars, we have people actively involved in the conversation. So it's not just a lecture sort of thing. And this summer we're doing a virtual series, a project management virtual series that we typically deliver in-house to help people get their PMP certification. But even if they're not going for certification, we'll have people from all over the world. They're just, I want to get better at project management. And so it's, I'm really looking forward to leading that session this summer as well.
You are the author of Navigating the Winds of Change, Staying on Course in Business and in Life, Shining the Light on the Secret, and an ebook entitled How to Organize Your Inbox and Get Rid of Email Clutter. Can you tell us more about the inspiration behind your books and the key points for your readers?
Yeah, the Navigating the Winds of Change book uses the metaphor of like sailing, and there's wind and there's waves, and we have the equipment that we have, but how do we deal with that? So it uses that metaphor as a way of looking at change. And I found that in part because I like sailing, but you don't have to be a sailor to appreciate the fact that you and I cannot control the wind, right? We cannot control government policy. We cannot control pandemics and things like this. But what do sailors do? Sailors have to find a way. All right, there's a wind change. I'm trying to get to here. How do I adjust? And so it uses that metaphor that we can shout at the wind, but that's not going to help us. So how do we learn to navigate? And so using that metaphor, there's a number of chapters that kind of try to give us a look at change. The Shining the Light on the Secret, it was actually a response to, it was many years ago now, but I'd be in workshops and people were talking about, did you read the book, The Secret? Did you read this new book, The Secret? And they were praising this book, and I started listening to what they're talking about. And honestly, it felt like a little bit of crazy talk. And so anyway, I read the book, and I just felt like, I mean, I've interviewed experts on this topic. Visualization can be helpful, but nothing changes without action. And if somebody's just going to sit back and visualize, I'm going to be a vice president of a company, I'm going to have a fancy car in my driveway, like I'm just going to attract it by thinking about it. Not only is it not effective, I argue it is dangerous. And I've subsequently, from when I wrote that book, I've interviewed, in fact, even just a recent, in fact, it's the current episode of the People and Projects podcast as of you and I talking here. They're just like, there's not data to support that sort of visualization. So anyway, the book is kind of a shining a light on that. The email clutter book is just, this is a daily burden for us of how do we stay on top of our email? And there is no magic. I mean, we have to find ways that work with our own styles of how to do it. But I think a lot of people are just overwhelmed on the email side and finding ways. So the book shares ideas on potential ways to find a better rhythm on what I think is the daily burden of managing our email. So that just gives you a little insight into what those are about.
Andy, are you perhaps working on an outline of a new content which will be added to your resume?
Yeah, in fact, right now we're about halfway through a book called Help for the Crazy Busy, and it's based on a keynote that we have by that topic. It's one of our most requested keynotes at, like, let's say a chapter meeting or at a conference, because most people feel crazy busy. They just feel like I'm out of control. And the book, based on the keynote, has just many practical ideas that can be customized to each person's style, because a lot of things that are based on the subject of time management or productivity are really good if you are a very structured person. Like I mean, there's all kinds of book, like David Allen's Getting Things Done. If you love lists and you love structure, you're going to love David Allen's approach. But some people are like, that's just way too much for me. So it offers a lot of interesting ideas. That the feedback from our work, from our keynotes, are always very positive. In fact, usually what people tell me is, you read my mail, you were speaking directly to me, and so the book is based on that.
Andy, thank you for giving us an overview of your next book, and I look forward to seeing it published. To conclude, what kind of advice would you give professionals who are at the very start of their career in project management? What is your advice to experienced project professionals as well, who feel stuck and challenged in their day-to-day activities?
Yeah, there's a couple things that we could even maybe just take from our discussion here today. I mean, some themes in this discussion have been, it's about people and it's about learning. And I guess when I was starting, that's wasn't obvious to me. And so if somebody is early in pursuing a project management career, just realize the thing that will make the difference is your effectiveness with people, which doesn't mean you have to be extroverted. I think sometimes it comes off that way. Like, to be an effective people person, you have to be extroverted. And I've had a number of conversations with experts on this, that it is not a matter of extroversion. It really, in fact, I've had Dan Pink on the podcast a couple times, and he talks about ambiverts. So the idea is, a lot of times it goes from 1 to 7. 1 is highly introverted, 7 highly extroverted. 4 is the ambivert. And a lot of times it's the 4s who rule the world, because the 1s don't speak up and the 7s don't shut up. Right? And so there's times where if someone's more of a 1 or 2, where if they're more introverted and they hear you and I talking and they see how many of your guests have talked about the people side of project management, but I'm a 1 or a 2, I'm highly introverted. You don't have to be a 7, but you might have to stretch in this meeting up to be a 4 or a 5. And after the meeting's done, just come back. I feel like a lot of the coaching clients I work with, a lot of the lessons we need to learn, whether they're new or whether they're seasoned as project managers, a lot of us could benefit from increasing our assertiveness a little bit, like a +1 of our assertiveness. I think a lot of times we would benefit from things like that. So learn to love the journey of getting better with our people skills. So you have to be more extroverted. In fact, if somebody's more of a 6 or 7, what they might need to do is pull it back and learn to ask questions more instead of speak up. But learn to love the journey of, how do I learn to read people? How do I learn to influence people? How do I learn to serve people? How do I learn this wonderful, beautiful, perplexing, art of dealing with people, managing up, managing out? It is the thing that, like we talked about before, you never really arrive, but can we just keep getting a little bit better at it? And can we keep just learning to be more effective? It is such a wonderful way to earn a living and to build a career. That's why I love project management.
Andy, thank you for sparing time to share your experience with our users. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Truly a pleasure for me. Thank you.